Number 1. Obsidian Blades. Under an electron microscope, the edge of a modern surgical scalpel looks like a saw. The steel is jagged, uneven, torn at the molecular level. Now put an obsidian blade under the same microscope. The edge tapers to a line roughly 30 angstroms wide. That is 3 nanometers. 1 molecule thick, a material first used by human hands over 30,000 years ago, remains to this day the sharpest cutting implement our species has ever produced. Obsidian is volcanic glass. It forms when felsic lava cools so rapidly that crystals never have time to develop. The result is an amorphous solid with no grain boundaries, no internal structure to interrupt a fracture. When you strike obsidian correctly, the fracture propagates in a smooth, curved shell called a conchoidal fracture. A skilled napper can exploit that fracture pattern to remove flakes with extraordinary precision, producing edges so thin they interact with biological tissue at the cellular level. In 1987, Dr. Lee Green at the University of Alberta tested obsidian scalpels against standard surgical steel on rat skin. The results were unambiguous. Obsidian produced cleaner incisions with less tissue trauma. Healing times were significantly faster. Under electron microscopy, the obsidian blade had split individual cells cleanly in half. The steel blade had torn between them, leaving ragged margins. This was not a marginal difference, it was a categorically different kind of cut. But obsidian surgery did not begin in a modern lab. In the 1970s, an experimental napper named Don Crabtree at Idaho State University produced his own obsidian blades and then handed them to a surgeon named Dr. Bruce Buck, who used them to perform Crabtree's hernia operation, a Stone Age tool in a modern operating theater, outperforming the instruments around it. The Aztecs understood this. At Teotihuacan, between 100 and 650 CE, obsidian workshops mass-produced over 400 prismatic blades from a single prepared core using pressure flaking techniques. This was industrial-scale manufacturing. The blades were used for everything from surgery to sacrifice. Spanish accounts describe Aztec priests performing heart extractions with obsidian blades so sharp they could remove a still-beating heart in under 30 seconds. The precision required is staggering. The confidence in the material is absolute. And it was not just the Aztecs. At Çatalhöyük in what is now Turkey between 7500 and 5700 BCE, archaeologists found obsidian mirrors polished to optical quality alongside surgical blades. In Egypt, Mesoamerica, and East Africa, obsidian was independently selected for circumcision rituals. 3 continents, 3 unrelated cultures, all arriving at the same conclusion. Obsidian cuts better than anything else. X-ray fluorescence analysis has traced Anatolian obsidian 900 kilometers from its geological source, revealing trade networks that existed before agriculture. Fumiko Ikawa-Smith documented obsidian tool production in Hokkaido, Japan, dating to 30,000 years ago, among the earliest evidence of long-distance raw material transport on Earth. People walked extraordinary distances to get this stone. They knew what it could do. Here's the paradox. The same amorphous structure that gives obsidian its impossible sharpness also makes it fatally brittle. It cannot bend. It can only shatter. That makes it devastating for cutting but useless for sustained combat. One strike against a hard surface and the blade explodes into glass shrapnel. Under the Geneva Convention's Protocol 3 on fragmentary weapons, that secondary shrapnel effect alone would likely classify obsidian as a prohibited weapon. No modern military has adopted it, not because it is inferior, because it is uncontrollable. Dr. Detlef Sponke in Germany has used obsidian scalpels in corneal surgery, achieving smoother incisions than diamond-bladed instruments. A company called NanoPoint in Portland, Oregon, tried to commercialize obsidian surgical blades in the early 2000s. The FDA could not figure out how to classify them. The project collapsed. The sharpest cutting tool ever made, and the modern world cannot figure out what to do with it. But the ancient world could. And one civilization figured out how to put it on a sword. Number 2. The Macuahuitl. On the night of June 30th, 1520, Hernán Cortés and his forces attempted to flee Tenochtitlan under cover of darkness. The Aztecs were waiting. In the chaos of what the Spanish would call La Noche Triste, a conquistador named Bernal Díaz del Castillo watched an Aztec warrior swing a flat wooden weapon and take the head off a horse in a single stroke. He recorded it in his memoir, Historia Verdadera de la Conquista de la Nueva España, published in 1568. A wooden sword had outperformed European steel. The Macuahuitl, from the Nahuatl, for a handwood, was a flat wooden club between 70 and 100 centimeters long, embedded with 6 to 8 prismatic obsidian blades along both edges. The blades were seated in carved grooves and fixed with an adhesive called sakuli, derived from orchid bulbs. That adhesive was waterproof, humidity-resistant, and maintained bonding strength in tropical conditions. European woodworkers had nothing comparable until the invention of synthetic glues. Modern reconstructions confirm the weapon's lethality. Weapons historian Mike Lodes, working for a National Geographic documentary, demonstrated that a reconstructed Macuahuitl could cut through a pig carcass to the spine in a single stroke. The PBS series Nova measured impact forces at approximately 120 joules. That is comparable to a baseball bat, except this baseball bat has a cutting edge sharper than a surgical scalpel. The Codex Mendoza illustrates a two-handed variant called the Macuahuitl Zotzopazili, roughly 120 centimeters long, reserved for elite eagle and jaguar warriors. Training began at age 15 in the Telpochcali. But the weapon was not designed purely for killing. During the Flower Wars, or Xochiaoyutl, the goal was often to capture opponents alive for sacrifice. Warriors aimed to hamstring or disable, not decapitate. The Macuahuitl was versatile enough to do both. Its most devastating feature was also its most accidental. When an obsidian blade struck Spanish steel armor, it shattered. The glass fragments sprayed into the opponent's face and hands. The Macuahuitl was a fragmentation weapon before the term existed. Dr. Marco Cervera Obregon at Mexico's National Museum of Anthropology has studied this extensively. Fray Diego Duran, writing in 1581, described Macuahuitl wounds as such terrible injuries that they seemed not to have been made by human hands. And the weapon was modular. Warriors carried spare obsidian blades and could refit the Macuahuitl in the field. It was a maintainable, repairable weapon system 600 years before modular firearms. Every single Macuahuitl was destroyed during and after the Spanish conquest. The last known specimen sat in Madrid's Royal Armory until it was lost in a fire in 1884. There are 0 surviving originals. The weapon that decapitated a horse, outperformed European steel, and spread glass shrapnel into its targets has been completely erased from the physical record. We know it only from accounts and illustrations, and from the wounds it left behind. Number 3. Clovis Points. 13,000 years ago, someone in what is now North America sat down with a piece of high-quality chert and attempted something extraordinarily difficult. They struck a channel flake from the base of a stone point, removing a long, narrow strip from both faces. This is called fluting. Modern experimental napper. Dr. Bruce Bradley at the University of Exeter estimates the failure rate at 40 to 50%, even for experts. Half the time, the point shatters. The napper did it anyway. The result was a Clovis point. For decades, the purpose of fluting was debated. Kenneth Tankersley argued in 1994 that it facilitated hafting to wooden foreshafts. Then in 2014, Dr. Metin Erin at Kent State University ran Clovis points through ballistic gelatin. The fluted points penetrated 13% deeper than unfluted controls. The wound channels were 20% wider. The fluting was not for attachment, it was for hemorrhage. The grooves acted as blood channels, accelerating blood loss. And the hafting system was even more insidious. Clovis points were mounted on detachable foreshafts. On impact, the main shaft separated and fell away. The point stayed inside. Removing it meant tearing open a wider wound than the entry. Leaving it meant bleeding out. There was no good option. At Naco, Arizona, archaeologists found 8 Clovis points embedded in a single mammoth skeleton. At El Fin del Mundo in Sonora, Mexico, Guadalupe Sanchez and Vance Holliday documented the first direct association between Clovis points and Gomphothere remains. George Frisson at the University of Wyoming demonstrated that Clovis-tipped spears penetrated elephant hide equivalent materials to depths of 15 to 25 centimeters. These were not improvised hunting tools, they were engineered killing systems. The nappers selected their raw materials with extraordinary care. X-ray fluorescence studies show they transported high-quality cherts over 300 kilometers to ensure optimal fracture properties. At the Galt site in Texas, Michael Collins recovered over 600,000 Clovis-era artifacts revealing the complete reduction sequence from raw stone to finished point. Juliet Morrow's 2019 analysis of impact fractures on recovered points showed lateral snap fractures and spin-off fractures consistent with high-velocity bone impacts. These points hit hard and they hit deep. Todd Suravel's monoisotopic analysis of Clovis-era megafauna bones suggests systematic targeting of juveniles and females, not random hunting. Calculated exploitation of the most vulnerable members of each herd. In 1967, Paul Martin proposed the overkill hypothesis. Clovis hunters, he argued, drove 35 genera of North American megafauna to extinction in roughly 700 years. The Clovis Point may be the first weapon system in history capable of annihilating entire species. Under the Hague Convention of 1899, Article 23 (e) prohibits projectiles that expand or flatten in the body. Clovis points functionally expand upon impact. The fluting ensures it. 13,000 years before the law was written, someone engineered the exact weapon it was designed to ban. Number 4. Sand Bushmen poison arrows. In 2012, Lucinda Backwell and her team published a study in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences describing residue found on a bone point from Border Cave in KwaZulu-Natal, South Africa. The residue was ricinoleic acid, consistent with poison application. The bone point was 24,000 years old. It is the earliest known evidence of chemical warfare on Earth. The Sand people of the Kalahari Desert used the larvae of Diamphidia nigruornata and Diamphidia simplex beetles, which pupate in the soil around Commiphora trees. The larvae produce a protein called diamphitoxin. It is a hemolytic agent. It punches holes in the membranes of red blood cells, causing them to rupture and release their contents into the bloodstream. The technical term is massive intravascular hemolysis. In plain language, the poison dissolves your blood from the inside. There is no antidote. This is not because no one has looked. Robert Koch, the Nobel Prize-winning bacteriologist who identified the tuberculosis and cholera pathogens, studied Diamphidia toxin in 1904 during his time in what was then German Southwest Africa. He failed to find a countermeasure. The problem is the mechanism itself. Diamphitoxin forms pores in cell membranes. Once those pores exist, there is no pharmaceutical way to close them. A single larva contains enough toxin to kill an adult human several times over. The lethal dose is approximately 10 micrograms per kilogram of body weight. The arrows are engineered for delivery, not direct killing. The toxin is smeared on the shaft behind the point, never on the tip itself. This prevents accidental self-poisoning during handling. The arrow is a compound tool, a reed main shaft, a bone link shaft, and a small point. On impact, the main shaft detaches and falls away. The poison link shaft remains embedded, slowly releasing toxin into the wound. Death in large game takes 1 to 5 days. The hunter follows. The symptom progression, documented clinically by Woolard and colleagues in 1986, begins with localized pain at the wound site, then muscular rigidity, then hemoglobinuria, dark red urine from the dissolved blood cells being filtered through the kidneys, then renal failure, then death. The victim is conscious for most of it. Cashmore and colleagues at the University of KwaZulu-Natal proposed in 2014 that Diamphidia toxin was the key technological innovation that allowed early Homo sapiens to become effective large-game hunters. The toxin's hemolytic mechanism is structurally similar to complement-mediated lysis in the human immune system. The beetle essentially weaponized a fundamental biological pathway that already existed in its prey. The Chemical Weapons Convention of 1993 defines a chemical weapon as any chemical which through its chemical action on life processes can cause death. Diamphidia arrows meet every word of that definition. The World Health Organization classified the toxin as a potential bioweapon precursor in a 2004 review. 24,000 years of continuous use, and it would be illegal under every modern treaty governing armed conflict. Number 5. The Atlatl. The human arm, unassisted, generates roughly enough force to throw a spear at 20 to 25 meters per second. Against a mammoth, that is not enough. The animal is too large, the hide too thick, the bone too dense. You need more velocity. You need more force. You need a lever. The Atlatl is a wooden shaft, typically 40 to 60 centimeters long, with a hook or spur at one end that engages the base of a flexible dart. The thrower holds the Atlatl behind the dart, and the device effectively extends the length of the throwing arm by 60 to 100%. Dr. John Whitaker at Grinnell College measured Atlatl dart velocities at 35 to 40 meters per second. That is a 70 to 100% increase over a hand-thrown spear. The kinetic energy at launch reaches 20 to 25 joules, comparable to a .22 caliber bullet at extreme range. The physics are elegant. The Atlatl functions as a third-class lever, with the wrist as the fulcrum. It converts slow muscular contraction into rapid rotational acceleration, which is then translated into linear dart velocity at the moment of release. Carl Hutchings at Thompson Rivers University used high-speed cameras to document the dart's flight characteristics and found a spin rate of 3 to 5 rotations per second. That spin stabilizes the dart in flight. It is the same principle as rifling in a firearm barrel. The flexible dart itself stores additional energy. During the throw, the dart bends around the Atlatl spur, compressing like a spring. As it leaves the device, it straightens, releasing that stored elastic energy. This is the spear-throwing equivalent of the archer's paradox in biotechnology. The dart is not a rigid projectile, it is a dynamic system. The Atlatl was independently invented on every inhabited continent. Australia had the Woomera. Mesoamerica had the Atlatl. The Arctic had the Inuit throwing board. Europe had the Magdalenian spear thrower, with the earliest definitive evidence being a carved antler hook from Combe-Saunière in the Dordogne, dated to approximately 17,500 years ago. This is convergent technological evolution. Every human population facing the same physics arrived at the same solution. At Murray Springs, Arizona, Atlatl launched Clovis darts penetrated mammoth ribs. The spacing and angle of embedded points suggest coordinated attacks from multiple directions. This was not lone hunting. This was tactical deployment of a weapon system. Spanish conquistadors recorded that Aztec Atlatl darts could penetrate steel armor at close range. Cortez lost men to Atlatl wounds during the siege of Tenochtitlan. The weapon remained in Aztec military service alongside the bow because its darts had superior penetration against padded cotton armor. The Atlatl served as humanity's primary projectile weapon for approximately 30,000 years. It is the longest-serving weapon system in human history. And some researchers, including those studying Neanderthal skeletal trauma patterns, believe it may have decided the competition between Homo sapiens and Homo neanderthalensis. The Neanderthals used thrusting spears. They got close to their prey. Their skeletons show the injuries to prove it. Homo sapiens stood back and threw. The species with the lever arm inherited the earth. Number 6. Human bone daggers of Papua New Guinea. In the Sepik River region and the highlands of Papua New Guinea, warriors traditionally manufactured daggers from the tibiae of their deceased fathers. Not from any bone, from their fathers. The weapon was personal in the most literal sense possible. Anthropologist Paul Roscoe at the University of Maine documented the belief system. Wielding a father's bone channeled the dead man's fighting spirit directly into combat. It was ancestral power made physical. In 2018, Nathaniel Dominy and his team at Dartmouth College published a study in Royal Society Open Science that subjected this belief to material science. They CT scanned human bone daggers and cassowary bone daggers from museum collections and then tested them to failure under controlled bending stress. Human tibial bone daggers withstood approximately 31% more stress before fracturing than cassowary bone daggers. The spiritual choice was also the mechanically optimal choice. The warriors were right. The daggers averaged 22 to 28 centimeters in length. The distal end was ground to a sharp point on rough stone over days or weeks. The proximal end retained the natural tibial plateau, which served as a ready-made handle. The design was not just for stabbing, it was for splintering. On deep penetration, the bone was intended to fragment inside the wound. In a world without antibiotics, bone shrapnel in a deep puncture wound meant infection. Infection meant death. These were prestige weapons. You did not carry one into a pitched battle. Pitched battles used bamboo-tipped spears and stone clubs. The bone dagger was for close combat, for ambush, for payback killings. In some highland communities, the dagger was the only permissible weapon for revenge. The requirement to kill at arm's length with your father's bone ensured the killing was personal, witnessed, and meaningful. Colonial-era medical reports from Australian patrol officers describe the wounds as ragged puncture injuries with retained bone fragments. The sharpening process itself was ceremonial. Specific chants accompanied the grinding. Food restrictions and sexual abstinence were observed during manufacture. The weapon was not a tool, it was a relationship. The practice persisted into the 1950s and 60s when Australian colonial patrols confiscated bone daggers during pacification campaigns. Ethnographic collections at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the Peabody Museum at Harvard, and the Australian Museum hold over 100 documented specimens. Under the Geneva Convention's Article 35, Protocol 1, weapons designed to cause superfluous injury are prohibited. A weapon engineered to leave bone fragments inside a wound qualifies without question. Number 7. The Schöningen Spears. In 1994, archaeologist Hartmut Thiem was supervising excavations at an open-pit lignite mine in Schöningen, Lower Saxony, Germany, when his team found a wooden shaft in waterlogged lakeside sediments. Over the next 4 years, they recovered 8 complete wooden spears and 1 lance. They were approximately 300,000 years old. They were made by Homo heidelbergensis. They are the oldest complete hunting weapons ever found. The spears survived because they were buried in anaerobic conditions. No oxygen meant no decay. Organic material that would normally disintegrate within decades had persisted for 300 millennia. The longest specimen, designated Spear 2, measured 2.3 meters. The average ranged from 1.8 to 2.3 meters. For comparison, a modern Olympic javelin is 2.6 to 2.7 meters. The manufacturing was deliberate and sophisticated. The spears were carved from spruce trunks. The killing tip was made from the base of the trunk, near the roots, where the wood is hardest and densest. The shaft tapered toward the rear. The center of gravity sits in the front third. This is the exact balance point of a modern competition javelin. It optimizes aerodynamic stability and throwing distance. Anamika Milks at University College London published experimental data in Scientific Reports in 2019 showing that trained throwers using reconstructed Schöningen spears achieved distances exceeding 20 meters and penetrated ballistic gelatin equivalent to deer hide and muscle. The tips show thermal discoloration consistent with deliberate fire hardening at 200 to 300 degrees Celsius. This process drives moisture from the wood and cross-links the lignin, increasing surface hardness by 50 to 100%. It is a controlled chemical treatment of a natural material to improve its mechanical properties. The spears were found alongside the butchered remains of at least 20 individual horses. This was not scavenging. This was organized group predation. Before Schöningen, the prevailing view in paleoanthropology was that pre-Homo sapiens hominins were primarily scavengers. The scavenger hypothesis held that complex coordinated hunting required cognitive abilities only modern humans possessed. Schöningen destroyed that hypothesis. A species with a brain size of 1,100 to 1,400 cubic centimeters, overlapping with the modern human range, had selected specific trees, felled them, debarked them, shaped them with stone tools, fire-hardened the tips, balanced the shafts, and then used them in coordinated ambush hunting. The manufacturing sequence involves a minimum of 10 to 15 distinct production steps. Each step requires the previous one to succeed. Wind tunnel testing confirmed the spears were aerodynamically functional, with drag coefficients comparable to modern javelins. Spear 4 was a double-pointed thrusting variant, proving the toolmakers maintained different weapon types for different hunting scenarios. 300,000 years before our species existed, someone who was not us built weapons we could not improve upon. That should make us uncomfortable. It should also make us pay attention to what came after. Number 8. Ancient sling bullets. A lead sling bullet weighing 30 grams, launched from a braided cord sling at 60 meters per second, delivers approximately 54 joules of kinetic energy to its target. For comparison, a .44 Magnum handgun round at 50 meters delivers roughly 60 to 70 joules. A weapon made of string and a piece of metal matches a modern handgun. The sling has been in continuous use since at least 7400 BCE, when the earliest known sling stones were deposited at Çatalhöyük. lead sling bullets became standardized military ammunition across the Greek, Roman, and Persian worlds from the 5th century BCE onward. Eric Skov published ballistic studies in the Journal of Archaeological Science reports in 2020 measuring muzzle velocities of 40 to 65 meters per second. The biconvex almond-shaped form factor of lead glandies was deliberately aerodynamic. Computational fluid dynamics modeling at the University of Leicester confirmed the shape minimizes drag and maintains trajectory stability. Vegetius, writing in De Re Military in the 4th century CE, stated that sling bullets caused more casualties than arrows in siege warfare. The reason was simple. An arrow creates a visible wound. A sling bullet does not. It delivers blunt force trauma, depressed skull fractures, internal organ rupture, cavitation injuries beneath unbroken skin. Soldiers hit by sling bullets sometimes did not know they were dying. At Burnswork Hillfort in Scotland, archaeologist John Reed recovered over 400 Roman sling bullets in 2016. Many of them had small holes drilled through them, 5 to 8 millimeters in diameter. Acoustic testing revealed these holes turned the bullets into whistles. In flight, they produced a shrieking noise audible at over 100 meters. The Romans had invented a psychological weapon. The bullets did not just kill, they terrified everyone within earshot. Recovered glandies from the siege of Perusia in 41 to 40 BCE bear inscribed Latin taunts. Pete culum Octaviani. Seek Octavian's backside. Ishires panem oxype. Hungry? Have some bread. The soldiers who cast these bullets were not afraid of their enemy. They were mocking them. Xenophon recorded in his Anabasis that Rhodian slingers outranged Persian archers by a factor of 2, achieving effective distances of 350 to 400 meters. The Balearic Islanders of Majorca and Minorca were the ancient world's most feared slingers. Strabo wrote that children were not given food until they could hit it off a post with a sling. Alexander the Great maintained permanent corps of slingers in his army. They served at Gaugamela and the Hydaspes. The sling's effective range exceeded the longbow and matched the composite bow while requiring no expensive materials, just cord and lead. It is arguably the most underestimated weapon in military history. 10,000 years of continuous dominance, delivering handgun force impacts to targets who often never saw it coming. Number 9. Shark-tooth swords of Kiribati. In the Gilbert Islands, now the Republic of Kiribati, warriors developed a weapons tradition that exists nowhere else on Earth. They took the teeth of sharks, animals whose dental geometry has been refined by over 400 million years of predatory evolution, and lashed them to wooden frames to create swords, tridents, daggers, and full-body armor. The primary weapon was the tabana, a sword-like implement lined with shark teeth along both edges. The teeth came from spot-tail sharks and blacktip reef sharks, selected for size, serration quality, and root strength. Each tooth, 2 to 4 centimeters long, was individually seated in a carved notch in hardwood and bound with braided coconut quidger fiber. A single tabana could contain 80 to 120 teeth. Weeks of labor went into one weapon. The damage mechanism was fundamentally different from any metal blade. A steel sword cuts. It parts tissue along a single plane. A shark-tooth sword shreds. Each tooth has its own angle, its own serration pattern, its own depth of penetration. A single strike produces multiple parallel lacerations at irregular depths, tearing tissue in slightly different directions. Colonial era surgeons described the wounds as untreatable. You cannot suture a wound with dozens of divergent tear lines, and the teeth worked in both directions. The backward angled serrations caught and tore flesh on the backstroke as effectively as the forward swing. Arthur Grimble, the British colonial administrator who governed the Gilbert Islands from 1914 to 1933, documented the fighting traditions extensively in his memoir, A Pattern of Islands. Combat was ritualized but devastating. Warriors met on designated Maniaba grounds. The T-Cown, shark-tooth gauntlets allowed fighters to rake opponents in grappling range. The T-Barantauti, a full-body armor suit studded with outward-facing teeth, made grappling with an armored opponent an act of self-mutilation. When European metal weapons arrived, the Gilbertese warriors initially rejected steel swords. Metal could not replicate the shredding action. A clean cut was considered inferior to the tabana's devastating multi-laceration strike. Captain Charles Wilkes of the United States Exploring Expedition collected shark-tooth weapons between 1838 and 1842. They are now in the Smithsonian. Under the Hague Convention of 1899, weapons designed to inflict wounds that are inherently difficult or impossible to treat are prohibited. Every wound inflicted by a shark-tooth sword meets that criterion. 400 million years of evolutionary optimization repurposed into a weapon that no modern law of war would permit. Number 10. The Mere Pounamu. The Mere Pounamu is not a sword. It is not an axe. It has no edge designed to cut. It is a flat, teardrop-shaped club, 30 to 45 centimeters long, made from nephrite jade found only in the rivers of New Zealand's South Island west coast. Nephrite has a Mohs hardness of 6 to 6.5 and a tensile strength that exceeds most steels. It does not cut. It transmits force. Maori combat doctrine, known as Mau Rakau, trained warriors to target one specific point on the human skull, the pteriurn. This is the junction of 4 cranial bones, the frontal, parietal, temporal, and sphenoid. It is the thinnest point on the skull, roughly 2 to 3 millimeters, and it lies directly over the middle meningeal artery. A percussive strike to the pterion causes the artery to rupture. Blood fills the space between the skull and the brain membrane. This is an epidural hematoma. Without modern neurosurgery, it kills within minutes to hours. The Mere's teardrop shape concentrated all impact force into a contact area of 3 to 5 square centimeters. At the velocities achievable in close combat, this generates pressures of approximately 20 to 30 megapascals. That is enough to fracture any bone in the human body. The Auckland War Memorial Museum tested Mere Pounamu strikes on bone density analogs and produced fracture patterns consistent with high-velocity vehicle impacts. A car crash, delivered through a handheld jade club. Manufacturing a Mere Pounamu took months to years. Pounamu boulders were first scored with sandstone cord saws, a process that could take weeks for a single cut. The rough shape was then ground on wet sandstone blocks for hundreds of hours. Final polishing used progressively finer abrasive. The entire process used no metal, stone, sand, water, and time. A single mere represented 200 to 500 hours of skilled labor, making it one of the most labor-intensive weapons in human history. Named mere were heirlooms carrying centuries of genealogy. Te Aratangata, Kaiwiri, Komore. Each weapon accumulated the mana, the spiritual authority, of every victory and every ritual execution it performed. The Taki, the ritual killing of a defeated chief with a single blow to the temple, was among the most sacred acts in Maori warfare. The mere used in a Taki absorbed the mane of the fallen. The weapon grew more powerful through use. Pounamu itself was a strategic resource. The Ngai Tahu Iwi of the South Island controlled primary access to the Arahura River deposits. Jade was traded across both islands, exchanged between chiefs as diplomatic currency, and buried with warriors as grave goods. Captain James Cook documented Mere Pounamu during his 1769 to 1770 expedition. Joseph Banks described them as short green stone truncheons and noted their lethal effectiveness. Today, approximately 60 to 80 historic Mere Pounamu are held in museum collections worldwide. Te Papa Tongarewa, the Museum of New Zealand, holds the largest collection, with several classified as taonga, sacred treasures protected under the Treaty of Waitangi. The weapon that rejected the blade entirely and perfected the physics of a single, precisely targeted blow. These 10 weapons span 300,000 years, 6 continents, and at least 4 distinct species or populations of tool-making hominins. Not one of them is crude. Not one of them is simple. Obsidian exploits molecular physics. The Macuahuitl combines modular engineering with polymer adhesive chemistry. Clovis Points are ballistic hemorrhage systems. Sand poison arrows are biochemical weapons targeting a fundamental cellular pathway. The Atlatl is a lever arm that converts angular momentum into lethal velocity. Human bone daggers are materials engineered to fragment on impact. The Schöningen Spears are aerodynamically optimized projectiles built by a species that was not us. Sling bullets deliver handgun-equivalent kinetic energy from a piece of cord. Shark-tooth swords weaponize 400 million years of evolutionary refinement. And the Mere Pounamu is a mineralogical precision instrument targeting a specific 3mm weak point on the human skull. Every one of them would violate at least one article of the Geneva Conventions, the Hague Declarations, or the Chemical Weapons Convention. 7 would be unambiguously illegal. 2 fall into gray zones. Only the Schöningen Spears, the weapons made by a non-human species, might pass modern legal review. The distance between us and the people who made these weapons is measured in centuries, in millennia, in some cases in hundreds of thousands of years, but it is not measured in intelligence. They had the same physics, the same biology, the same capacity for ingenuity. What they lacked was accumulated knowledge, not the ability to generate it. What they built with what they had is not a testament to primitive violence. It is a testament to engineering under constraint. The laws of nature have not changed. Only our willingness to exploit them this way has. These weapons do not tell us who we were. They tell us who we are. These 10 weapons span 300,000 years, 6 continents, and at least 4 distinct species or populations of tool-making hominins. Not one of them is crude. Not one of them is simple. And what becomes clear when you lay them side by side is that 3 fundamentally different killing philosophies emerge across deep time, each one solving the same problem through a different branch of physics. The first philosophy is surface destruction. Obsidian and the Macuahuitl maximize the cutting interface. They were designed to open the body, to create wounds so wide and so clean that blood loss was immediate and catastrophic. The obsidian edge works at the molecular level. The Macuahuitl multiplied that edge across a sword-length striking surface. Both relied on the same material. Both relied on the same fracture mechanics. One was a surgical instrument. The other was an industrial application of the same science. The second philosophy is internal destruction. Clovis points and sand poison arrows were not designed to damage the surface. They were designed to get inside the body and stay there. The Clovis points fluting created hemorrhage channels, and its detachable foreshaft ensured the point could not be removed. The sand arrow deposited a slow-release toxin depot in the wound channel. Both weapons treated the body as a container to be compromised from within. Both required patience. The kill was not instantaneous, it was engineered to be slow and certain. The hunter followed, the prey weakened, time was the weapon. The third philosophy is force multiplication. The Atlatl, the Sling, and the Mere Pounamu each took the limited kinetic output of a human body and amplified it through mechanical advantage. The Atlatl used a third-class lever. The Sling used centripetal acceleration. The Mere concentrated impact force into a 3 square centimeter contact point. None of these weapons looked impressive. A stick, a cord, a flat stone. But the physics behind each one generated forces that the human arm alone could never produce. The Atlatl matched a .22 caliber round. The Sling matched a .44 Magnum. The Mere matched a car crash. And then there were the weapons that defied all 3 categories. The shark-tooth swords of Kiribati weaponized 400 million years of biological evolution. The human bone daggers of Papua New Guinea turned the human body itself into both weapon and symbol. The Schöningen Spears were aerodynamically optimized javelins built by a species that no longer exists. These weapons do not fit neatly into philosophies of destruction because they were not just engineering achievements. They were expressions of identity, ancestry, and ecological relationship. Now, map each weapon against the specific international laws it would violate. Obsidian produces glass shrapnel on impact. That is a fragmentary weapon under Protocol 3 of the Geneva Conventions. The Macuahuitl produces the same shrapnel. Same violation. Clovis points expand and flatten inside the body. The Hague Convention of 1899, Article 23E, explicitly prohibits projectiles designed to do this. Sand poison arrows are chemical weapons by the exact definition written into the Chemical Weapons Convention of 1993. The Atlatl is technically a mechanical device used to propel a projectile, which is the functional legal definition of a firearm. Human bone daggers are designed to leave fragments inside the wound. Article 35 of Protocol 1 prohibits weapons causing superfluous injury. Sling bullets deliver blunt force trauma through drilled whistling ammunition designed for psychological terror. Shark-tooth swords create wounds that are inherently untreatable, prohibited under the Hague Declaration of 1899. 7 out of 10 would be unambiguously illegal under modern international law. 2 more fall into legal gray zones. Only the Schöningen Spears, the weapons manufactured by Homo heidelbergensis 300,000 years ago, might survive modern legal review. The weapons made by a non-human species are the only ones that meet human laws of war. That is not coincidence. Homo sapiens specifically engineered for maximum suffering. The conventions exist because of us. Each of these weapons also represents a breakthrough in material science that modern researchers can trace and validate. Obsidian knappers understood the amorphous structure of volcanic glass through empirical trial and error. Maori carvers identified nephrite jade's unique combination of hardness and toughness from among thousands of available stones, and then sourced it from specific rivers controlled by specific tribes. Roman engineers experimented with lead antimony and lead tin alloys to optimize sling bullet density. Papua New Guinean warriors selected human tibiae over cassowary bone, and Dartmouth's 2018 study proved they were mechanically correct. The Schöningen tool makers chose spruce trunk bases for tip material and fire-hardened them at precisely the right temperature to cross-link lignin without charring the structure. Sand hunters extracted, processed, and preserved a protein-based hemolytic toxin using heat treatment calibrated to maintain potency. No formal science existed, no peer review, no laboratory instruments. All of this was empirical, experimental, observational. The knowledge was transmitted through language, apprenticeship, and cultural memory over hundreds of generations, and when the culture died, the knowledge died with it. The Macuahuitl proves this. When the Aztec civilization fell, the manufacturing knowledge vanished. The Tzakutli adhesive recipe, the specific orchid species, the processing method, the curing conditions, all gone. Modern reconstructions are approximations. Nobody alive knows the exact technique. The San's poison arrow knowledge survives only because their culture has survived, and it is diminishing with each generation. The Schöningen manufacturing tradition is extinct along with the species that created it. Sling warfare doctrine died with the last Roman military slingers. Clovis napping can be approximated by modern flint nappers, but the cultural transmission chain is permanently broken. Knowledge extinction is as real as species extinction. When a weapon tradition dies, a body of empirical science accumulated over hundreds of generations dies with it. These were not just weapons. They were repositories of everything their makers had learned about the physical world. What we have lost is incalculable. What survives, we reconstruct from artifacts and guesswork. The distance between us and the people who made these weapons is measured in centuries, in millennia, in some cases in hundreds of thousands of years. But it is not measured in intelligence. They had the same physics, the same biology, the same capacity for ingenuity. What they lacked was accumulated knowledge, not the ability to generate it. The Macuahuitl's modular field repair anticipated modern weapons maintenance by 6 centuries. The Sands toxicology anticipated modern chemical weapons doctrine by 24 millennia. The sling bullet's biconvex aerodynamics anticipated computational fluid dynamics by 10,000 years. What they built with what they had is not a testament to primitive violence, it is a testament to engineering under constraint. The laws of nature have not changed. The human mind has not changed. Only the tools we use to interrogate those laws have changed. These weapons do not tell us who we were. They tell us, with uncomfortable clarity, exactly who we are.